Hi, I'm John Townsend. I'm here today at Gunston Hall. Again, I've got Michael Twitty with me as a special guest. Today we're talking about the evolution of barbecue sauces in early America. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking. So barbecue sauces, tell me a little bit about the history of barbecue, at least in this setting,
Sure.
and what we've got here.
So barbecue is not just people roasting meat on a fire. Barbecue is a very specific American, Atlantic world, creation. Mm-hmm. It's what happens when African and Native American in particular cooking styles, grilling something over a wooden framework for a period of hours, or over a hole in the ground for a period of hours, is particularly the root of barbecue. Today what we're going to do is going to take a portion of beef rib. Normally this would be done a whole animal,
Right.
A whole hog, a whole sheep, whole cow, whatever, whole pig.
Right, and outside.
Outside in a hole over a framework of sticks.
And it's a celebratory kind of thing? It's not just an everyday
this would be
thing.
something that you would have during the warmer parts of the year, or even Christmas time. And for the enslaved community in particular, this would be one of the rare opportunities where they could actually have fresh meat from a domesticated animal that would be, in mass quantity. So this would be something that would be very unique to the Southern celebratory repertoire. This
one you've already pre-prepared, right? We've already got some preparing.
So there's a little bit of cloves stuck into the fat portion of the meat, which is it's very deep, and also I scored this section of beef rib and put a little bit of garlic inside. And some people may be like, well, what's all that about? In the 18th and 19th centuries, they were still working from the sort of medieval of like spicing repertoire, much more elaborate than what you see come the early 20th century, where the cookbooks were written for people who were of limited means, who might have just been learning how to cook, learning how to read, and learn how to read English.
Right. So they stripped all that out.
Yeah, stripped all that. Very simple, sort of like basics. But in this time period, when you're reading Mary Randolph and other people, they're talking about barbecue that involves wine and mushroom sauce, and there's hot pepper. So there's people in different areas did barbecue according to their own particular tastes and what they had access to. So what we're going to do is first put a little bit of mustard down, just rub it all over. And what's going to do is, as the fat renders and as the juices come out, it'll all kind of merge together. And if this looks familiar, folks who are from certain parts of the Carolinas where mustard's used, it's a very German thing in the South. We're using the use of mustard. Whereas the hot peppers is very African and Caribbean. And so because we don't have any mushroom catsup, we'll use the equivalent, which is Worcestershire, our modern equivalent. Then we'll take a little bit of salt. This is kitchen pepper. Everybody has their own kitchen pepper. Like everybody has their own curry or whatever. I just use 1 part each of allspice, ginger, cloves, black pepper, white pepper, nutmeg, and something else.
The secret ingredient.
The secret ingredient.
Okay.
From the perspective of West Africans and Western Europeans, they're both taking advantage of these spices. So they operate on a bicultural level. So you have both elements being honored in this dish. And of course we have the world favorite, red pepper. What we're going to do is, we're going to pull some coals out, we're going to put them into the gridiron, and then we're just going to let it cook for however long it takes. And then meanwhile, we'll work on the sauces.
So our meat's been on the gridiron here for a while. It's time for the sauces.
Right.
What are we gonna make?
So there's 2 sauces that I wanted to share with the audience, and one is sauce we presume is from about 1770, 1780 in Virginia, and it's composed of butter, vinegar, sage, and red pepper. Okay. That one comes from a reference from the late 1800s. It talks about a Virginia barbecue of 100 years ago. It talks about how simple the mop was, and it's pretty consistent with what we know and heard about barbecue from its 18th century descriptions through its mid-19th century descriptions. So the simple one what we're gonna do is take some butter and put a little bit of sage into it, And then when it melts down, we're going to add vinegar. We're going to add the salt, the red pepper, and the black pepper. And we're going to let that cook, and that's it.
Okay.
The second one, we're going to take onion and garlic, saute them, and then add the rest of the spices, the vinegar, and the other ingredients. A man named Wesley Jones was interviewed by the Works Product Administration. So when he was a child through a teenager, he was learning this craft probably from his father. He became a barbecue pit master. And this was frequent. Enslaved men were, for the most part, the center of the barbecue cooking trade. He doesn't really give you a recipe. He says, this is what I did. And it's up to the cook to figure out what proportions, how much. And I don't think it's really, I think it's always to taste. He talks about adding a little bit of salt to it. He talks about adding herbs like basil and sage to it. He talks about pepper, and I'm going to tell you that, you know, for me, I like to always interpolate just a little bit. So I always add a little bit of kitchen pepper.
Kitchen pepper.
To mine. We're also going to add in a little bit of red pepper. If you'll hand me that coriander. And I think that's the most surprising ingredient in this whole mixture. So all these things that people were working with were sort of parallel ingredients to what they were already familiar with. So, you know, it's interesting to work through the food and sort of thinking about the thought process of these cooks, which are exiled from their homeland, but are also trying to acclimate themselves to the new world and also express their cultural identity.
Right. How do they bring some of those same flavors, even though they might not have exactly the same ingredients?
Exactly. So now we're going to add some apple cider vinegar, which is the heart of this particular mop.
So when he says mop, he means to put it, mopping it over the top of the...
Exactly. To keep because the meat is being cooked for several hours, low and slow, you don't want it to get dry, and you don't want it to sort of like lose its character. It's a little bit of molasses. That's pretty common. Vinegar and molasses become the main condiments of the enslaved community, and among others. All of that comes together. For me, putting these clothes on and teaching people about a time in our past when most people of African descent were enslaved is extremely important. But it also carries with it its own unique burdens on top of what it means to be a historic interpreter and educator. So how does this work? How does someone who is African American in the 21st century bring the past to life? And it's not just, we of course don't consider it just to be Black history, it's American history. So on the one level, it's part of our own unique past, and the other level, it's part of our national story.
Now we need the sauces.
Yes. Right? I'm gonna warn you,
yeah,
the vinegar is pretty heady. So it's gonna be very...
It's gonna be one of those top notes.
Yeah, it's gonna put some pep in your step. Start with 1780s.
Start with 1780s. So this is the simple vinegar sauce. That's amazing. That is really good.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit. There's a little bit there.
New things are happening.
Yeah. As you taste it, it's like more flavors keep coming through. More flavors.
And more pepper.
And more pepper keeps coming through. Really, really good.
Good.
So now I'm supposed to try this other one, huh?
Yes.
Okay. What happens 50 years later, 100
Right.
years later, this is what you're going to get. It's got some very, very good flavors right up front instead of this one, which takes a long time to get there.
Right.
An amazing contrast between those two flavors. This one's very kind of separated, just a couple notes. That one's much more complex, much more deep. I'm even wondering about what happens when they're used as a mop instead. I mean, these you just made right there.
Right.
And what happens when, you know, they're mixing with that meat the whole time. And,
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the different experience. The vinegar dies
Right.
down, other flavors come forward.
This
And the
is
onion and garlic also, I think, which we don't think of garlic as being a American or even Southern flavoring, but it was definitely there.
Yeah.
It was there and it was important. I think that helps make it. It makes it more familiar to us because we're so much more used to it
Yeah.
in our day than people were 50 years ago even.
Tremendous, wonderful. I want to thank you so much for bringing
Thank you.
these things to us. Experimenting with these flavors, understanding them, bringing the history of them out, that is so important. And it's like we can go back and share in some of that history. We can share in that collision of these cultures that are coming together in dishes like this. Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And I want to thank everyone out there for coming along, savoring the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. I want to thank everyone there at Gunston Hall for their wonderful help with this series. If you're interested in Gunston Hall, make sure to check out their website.